Distinguished delegates from SAARC member states and respected audience, good morning, and I welcome you all on behalf of SAARC Energy Center to this webinar on cross-border electricity trade in SAARC countries. We have assembled together a panel of expert speakers from inside and outside SAARC region to share their insights on different aspects of electricity trade, such as the importance of regional markets, regulatory framework, and current status of electricity trade. Dear audience, we have been graced by the presence of Mr. Mohammed Naeem Malik, Director, SAARC Energy Center. I would like to request Director SEC to open the webinar proceedings with his welcome note. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear participants of the webinar, friends and colleagues, Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. I, on behalf of the SAARC Energy Center, welcome you all to this knowledge sharing webinar on cross-border electricity trade in the SAARC region. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to open the discussion on this important technical topic for development and prosperity of nearly over 2 billion people living in this region. Dear participants, National Institute on Energy and a technical arm for the SAARC organization on energy matters. It is our endeavor to translate the energy vision of the SAARC leaders into reality. The center started its operation in the year 2008. During last 10-11 years, the center has emerged as a vibrant and effective SAARC institute, which has played its role in all regional level energy initiatives. Until 30th December 2019, the center has carried out more than 140 interventions. The reports of these interventions are available on our website. And be downloaded by all those who want to use that or download that. Increasing cross-border electricity trade. This trade can benefit from the complementary electricity demand pattern in neighboring countries, diversity in resource endowment, and large market access. It is important for SAARC member states to have power interconnections with neighboring countries for stable base load supply, energy diversification, and climate change mitigation. Dear participants, SAARC Energy Center has conducted a number of activities to promote electricity trade among SAARC countries. And today's webinar is one fine example for such activity. We have invited experts from inside and outside the SAARC region to share their insight on various aspects of cross-border electricity trade. I am delighted to acknowledge the great cooperation and support extended by them. The objective of the webinar is to share the information on cross-border electricity trade in South Asia to the participants and sensitize the policy and decision makers on the importance and benefit of such trade. Dear participants, in the end, I once again thank you all for joining this webinar and shall request you to please feel free in expressing your opinion and asking questions where you want to. I would like to extend my special thanks to the presenters of the webinar. Lastly, I wish you all a very comfortable learning and knowledge sharing session. With these remarks, I declare the session open. I request now Mr. Ahmadullah to please take us through the agenda. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your encouraging words. Before proceeding with the agenda, I would like to draw your attention towards certain things related to the webinar. Please note that the agenda of this webinar is already available on SEC website. All presentations, a brief report on webinar, and a webinar recording link will also be uploaded on SEC website. Members of the audience can ask a question by typing questions or clicking the raised hand option onto the GoToWebinar panel on your screen. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect the questions and address them during the question and answer session at the end of each presentation. Due to time limitation, we apologize in advance if we are unable to address your question. At the end of the webinar, a feedback survey will be launched on your screen. Please do provide your comments, feedback, and suggestions using the survey. Dear audience, we now will move to the first session of our webinar. Mr. Abhijit Rajendra will be presenting on cross-border electricity trade and regulations and guidelines. Mr. Abhijit has over 12 years of experience in the Indian power markets. He is currently working with Tata Power Trading Company, a 100% subsidiary of the Tata Power Company Limited. The Tata Power Company Limited is India's oldest and the largest integrated private sector power utility. Mr. Abhijit has deep understanding of Indian power markets and has commented extensively on various regulations, white papers, including cross-border trade of electricity. Mr. Abhijit holds a postgraduate diploma in management in marketing and is also professionally trained as a power engineer. So I welcome Mr. Abhijit. Over to you, Mr. Abhijit.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Tala, and very good morning to all the dignitaries and participants. And I thank SAARC Energy Center for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on the cross-border trade of electricity, which incidentally is a very important area in which all the SAARC countries are working towards. And as far as an Indian perspective is concerned, even the Indian government has now recognized this as a critical area, and they are working towards it. They are working very sincerely, and recently, 1 year back, they have framed regulations, and some policy guidelines have also been issued, and we hope that the cross-border trade will increase in years to come. So I'll just take you through. I have made a small presentation on the current policy and regulations which are prevailing in India, and I hope it will be useful to all of us. So so this is a brief agenda. I would be first touching on the current status on what India is currently trading with its neighbor. Then we'll have overview of the cross-border policy, and then the way forward. What are the limitations? What are the opportunities which exist in this domain? So India currently is trading the biggest cross-border electricity trade happening across India is with Bangladesh. India is exporting around 11,060 megawatts to Bangladesh. There are 4-5 contracts which are currently happening. So India and Bangladesh are currently connected through 2 separate transmission links. One is Behrampur-Bhedmara 400 kV DC line. The capacity earlier was 500 megawatt, and now it has been increased to 1,000 megawatts. So Bangladesh had carried out competitive bidding process for procuring 1100 megawatts, and the PPAs have been tied up. Some 250 megawatt of electricity through this Behrampur-Bhedmara DC line is being done through government-to-government transaction, meaning both these governments have decided on the tariff and on the quantum. This agreement is a long-term agreement. It's for a period of 25 years, and it has started way back in, I think, in 2012. Now, there is another transmission line which connects the Indian state of Tripura with Komila in Bangladesh. It's a small capacity. The line has it's a 400 kV DC line, double circuit line, but it is currently being operated at 132 kV only due to some technical limitations. And Bangladesh is currently importing 160 megawatt through Tripura. Now, India and Nepal, of course, has a long history of trading power. So there are 237 megawatts of contract megawatt is flowing through NVVNL, which is basically a government power trading company here in India, and it's also a government-to-government transaction. And recently, a 400 kV Muzaffarpur Dhalbekar double circuit line has been commissioned. It has been initially charged at 132 kV, and as the projects in Nepal are built, the plan is to bring more hydropower from Nepal to India through this line. There is another 100 megawatt uh, contract going between India and Nepal, which is basically through PTC, which is another trading licensee. And the major link is between Tanakpur in India to Nepal. Now, Bhutan, as we know, is a very hydro-rich country. So basically, there are two types of contract happening here. One is government-to-government contract, which is Chuka, Kuruchu, Tala, and Mangdechu. Mangdechu has recently been commissioned, and all this power is flowing into India. The surplus generated from these hydro stations are being exported to India. There is one small 126 megawatt Dagachu hydro project, which is not a government-to-government transaction. The power is flowing through Tata Power Trading Company only. So it was the first cross-border project which is selling its power in merchant market in India. So the government is not involved in this transaction. It's a purely private transaction, so to say. There are other some 3,000 megawatts of project coming in Bhutan, which will be commissioned in shortly, and all this power will also is expected to flow through India and through India to other neighboring countries also. Yes, so in December 2018, Ministry of Power, Government of India had issued guidelines for import-export of electricity. So if we have to have a common market, there should be a common a common regulations, a common technical guidelines which should prevail, so that there is one market. The electricity, the grid should be seamlessly connected. So taking that one step in that direction, what Indian government has done is has issued these guidelines, so that all the market participants have a fair idea of the rules and regulations of the market. So there was an earlier guideline which was issued way back in 2016, but after getting feedback from all the stakeholders, our neighboring countries also, the Ministry of Power decided to repeal those guidelines and issued a fresh set of guidelines on 18 December 2018. The objectives, of course, is to facilitate import-export of electricity, to ensure that there is a dynamic and robust electricity infrastructure, and any market can only operate if there is transparency, consistency, and predictability in regulatory mechanism. And electricity uh, sh- trade can only happen if there is a reliable grid operation. So all these, to address all these objectives, the guidelines have been issued. Just a second. Right. So this is the institutional framework. So what Government of India has said is there will be a designated authority which will facilitate the process of approval. So anyone who wants to trade electricity indulge in a cross-border trade of electricity, whether to import power or to export power from India, need to have an approval from the designated authority. So CEA, Central Electricity Authority of India, has been given this responsibility. They will lay down the procedure on what basis, how the approval has to be granted, how the transmission planning will happen, how the coordination among all these countries will happen. that rules needs to be framed by CEA. They are in the process of framing these rules, and once these rules are out, we'll have more clarity on the regulations part, the operational issues, etc. Now, then next is the settlement nodal agency, which will be responsible for settlement of all the charges. The system operator, there are various type of charges which you need to pay. The grid operation charges are there are deviation settlement charges, there are reactive energy pools and other regulatory pools, etc. So deviation charges are nothing but balancing charges. The grid needs to be balanced at all the times, because the frequency here is most important. So to keep the frequency in a set band, everyone has to give their, either the generator or the buyer has to give their schedules, and everyone has to stick to those schedules. And if we deviate from that schedule, then there are some penalties built into the mechanism. The National Load Dispatch Center, our NLDC, who is the system operator, has been given the responsibility of granting open access to the grid. So open access is nothing but the right to use the transmission grid. In India, we define there are three types of access which are granted. The first one is the short-term open access, which is the right to use the transmission grid for a period of up to 1 year. Then there is a medium-term open access, which gives you rights to use the transmission from 1 year to, from 3 months to 5 years. Then there is a long-term open access, of course, which is the right to use the transmission network for a period of 25 years or more. So the government had said, the MOP has said that the National Load Dispatch Center would be the nodal agency for grant of short-term open access. And then for medium-term open access and long-term open access, it's the central transmission utility, which would be the nodal agency. So any cross-border generator who wants to access the transmission grid of India will have to first have a open access agreement in place, and it can either approach NLDC or central transmission utility in this regard. Now, certain eligibility conditions have been defined before anybody can participate in import or export of electricity. So Indian entities, basically entities who are located in India, may either import or export directly or through power traders after taking approval from designated agency. Now, in case import is through a bilateral agreement between Government of India and any other country, then Government of India will designate a particular entity for import of power. For example, for importing power from Bhutan hydro projects, Government of India has nominated PTC India Limited as a designated agency to import Bhutan's power and distribute it among various constituents here. Now, in case any coal-based project in India wants to export its power, it has to ensure that the power is generated only through imported coal or through e-auction coal. So these projects are not allowed to use Indian domestic coal for generating electricity and then exporting it outside, because the reason is simple: because we already have a shortage of coal. Our own thermal projects are not able to get coal to operate at their full capacity. So the government has said that if you want to export electricity, you either use the auction coal or use import coal and then export this power outside. Now, the next point is a very important point. We have, like stock exchanges operate, we have power exchanges operating in India. There are currently 2 power exchanges, and previously cross-border entities were not allowed to trade through power exchanges. But now the current policy says that the cross-border entities would also be allowed to procure their power from these power exchanges, but they cannot access power exchanges directly. They have to access these exchanges through licensed power traders only. And these power exchanges have different types of products available with them, and no restriction have been placed on accessing any type of product in power exchanges. Now, the government has also given some guidelines on when to allow import and when to allow export. So what they have said is that the designated authority will allow import only if the demand in the country is more than the generation which is available in the country, and vice versa. So exports may be permitted if our capacity is in excess of the domestic demand. And one important thing which they have said is that if any generator wants to export power to India, they would have to give their ownership pattern, equity holding pattern to the designated authority, and any change in the ownership will have to be communicated to the designated authority. Now, this is the most important part. How would the tariff be determined? Determined for, sorry.
Yes, sir.
Shall I proceed, or is there any question? Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
So
Yeah, you can proceed.
yeah. So this is the this is a very important slide. So how would the tariff be determined? So basically, the guidelines talk about 2-3 methods in which the tariff may be determined. One is if somebody is importing power into India. If there is an Indian buyer or an Indian power distribution company which is importing power, then it can either go through a competitive bidding process where they come out with a competitive bid. Anybody is allowed to participate, and whosoever quotes the lowest tariff wins that bid and supplies power. Or there can be a mutual agreement between an Indian entity and the selling entity. So if there is a hydro project in Bhutan who wants to sell to to Delhi utility, so both of them can agree on a tariff and the power flow can happen. The third thing, the third option is we have a Central Electricity Regulatory Commission who comes out with regulations to determine tariff for hydro projects, for thermal projects, or for any other type of project also. So the hydro projects have been given a special dispensation because Government of India wants to promote hydro. So what they have said is if the buying Indian entity and the selling cross-border entity mutually agrees, both of them can then approach our central regulator, and based on their guidelines, based on their regulations, they can determine the tariff at which Indian entity can buy the power. And the last option, of course, is if both the governments agree on a tariff, then that tariff would be acceptable to the Indian entities. So this fourth option is being exercised most extensively till now, because till now there was not a cross-border market per se. Whatever cross-border trade was happening, it was happening through government-to-government negotiations and through government-to-government discussions. So it was the governments which were mutually agreeing to the tariffs. Now, export by Indian entity, if somebody wants to export power to a neighboring country, it can do so at a tariff which has been determined through a competitive bidding process, or it has been mutually agreed between both the selling and buying entity, or which has been mutually agreed between government of both the countries. So the trade with Bangladesh, it's a mixture of competitive bidding and tariff as agreed between government of both the countries. So 250 megawatt of power which is flowing through NVVN, the tariff has been determined, has been agreed between the governments, and the rest of the power which is flowing, Bangladesh had taken a competitive bidding route to procure that power. Now, because electricity needs transmission wires to travel from one place to other, there would be a transmission link which needs to be constructed between the pooling stations of India and neighboring countries. So to determine the tariff, who will bear what cost of this transmission link, the regulations say that there would be a competitive bidding process, or whatever the governments agree, that would be the tariff, or our central regulator can also step in and determine the tariff of this transmission link, and if both the countries agree, then that would be the tariff. The regulations also say that whatever tariff for import or export of electricity which has already been agreed before the notification of these guidelines would continue till the term of such agreements are over. Now, transmission planning is very important, because what happens is electricity has to travel through transmission network. So before planning any transmission network, the regulations, the guidelines have suggested that all the countries, suppose the electricity is to be exported from Bhutan to India, or for that matter from Nepal to India, then both the countries will designate a particular or nominate a particular authority who will then sit and do a joint transmission planning. So from Indian side, it is CEA, or the Central Transmission Utility, which would be nominated. It has not been nominated till now, but it would be nominated, and it will sit with the other countries' designated authority, designated agency, and a joint planning will happen. So the transmission planning will happen based on the transmission open access applications which are received. So if there is a demand for, say, 500 megawatt of generators want to export their power to India for a 25 years period, they will have to do a long-term open access agreement. Or vice versa, if some generator wants to export power to Bangladesh or to Nepal or to Sri Lanka or to any other neighboring country, then they'll have to do submit a transmission open access application, and based on these applications, the transmission planning will be conducted. So we in India already have transmission open access regulations. One is the short-term open access regulations, and other is the connectivity regulations, which basically are the set of regulations which which are concerned with how a generator will connect to the transmission grid, and how the medium term and long term open access would be granted. So the government says that these regulations, at least for the Indian part, will apply as it is. Now they have also defined some application fees, which I thought that I would share with you. So all these figures are in Indian rupees and in lakhs. So if in some 100 megawatt of generator wants to connect to the ISTS is nothing but interstate transmission system. So for connectivity, it will have to give 4 lakhs per megawatt. For medium term open access, it would have to give 2 lakhs per megawatt, and so on and so forth. So for long term open access, they are also asking for a bank guarantee of 5 lakh per megawatt, which would be valid for a period of 5 years from the date of operationalization of long term open access. So this bank guarantee is basically to ensure that whatever timelines you have committed within which you would develop your project, you stick to those guidelines. Otherwise, the transmission network would be ready, the project would be delayed, and the transmission operator would be stuck. So that's why they're asking for this access bank guarantee. Now, if somebody wants to get connected to the Indian grid, uh, then it has to apply. See, there are two options in which a cross-border entity can access the Indian transmission grid. One is that they can first connect to their own country's transmission grid, and that grid then in turn connects with Indian grid. Those entities need not apply for this grant of connectivity. Suppose somebody wants to connect directly to the Indian grid, then such entity needs to apply for grant of connectivity. So anybody wants to connect to Indian grid, they would have to apply to the designated authority, who will then take this application into account and then implement a dedicated transmission system network. CTU, the central transmission utility, will uh, give it's for this particularly for the Indian entities. Basically, they will process the application and grant connectivity as per their detailed procedures. They have already published their connectivity regulations. For Indian entities, the same will be applicable for cross-border entities also. So once the connectivity is granted, the applicant will sign a connectivity connection agreement with the CTU. Now, for mere connectivity does not entitle anyone to exchange electricity with the grid. So once the connectivity is in place, the applicant will then have to apply for either short-term access, medium-term access, or long-term access before the electricity can be exchanged. So for as I had earlier said, for short-term open access, application has to be made to NLDC, which is National Load Dispatch Center. The application would be sent to designated authority for their approval. Once their approval is in place, NLDC will grant short-term open access. There is a similar process for grant of long-term access and medium-term access. Only thing is the nodal agency here is our central transmission utility, and the application has to be made to central transmission utility. Now these guidelines also envisage a situation where Indian grid is the seller, suppose, is in Bhutan, the buyer is in Bangladesh, and the electricity, the power would be transferred using India's transmission system. So such type of tripartite transactions have also been envisaged in these guidelines. They have also been permitted, but only thing is for such type of transactions, Government of India has to give its approval, and access bank guarantee of 5 lakh per megawatt has to be given in such cases. So earlier such type of transactions were not being permitted, where the seller is in different country, the buyer is in a third country, and only India's transmission network would be used. But now the guidelines have said that we recognize that a market needs to be created, and the end case will arise where suppose Bhutan's generator would want to sell their power to Bangladesh's consumer, and it is virtually impossible to connect Bhutan and Bangladesh's grid electrically. So the Indian grid would be used for transmission of power, and whatever charges, fees, and for this usage of this transmission system would be applicable. Now there are some, there is always a chance that when you start building a project, your project may be delayed or your transmission network will be delayed. So that what would happen is my project is ready, but my transmission network is not ready. So my project is stranded. Or the other way around also, my project is not ready, but the transmission system is ready. So what these guidelines say that the designated authority shall monitor the progress of both the generating station and the transmission network, so that both of them are ready at the same time. But in case the project is getting delayed, the generator will have to pay the full transmission charge from the date on which its open access, its permission to use the Indian grid would have been given. So if I had said that I would start using the Indian grid from 1st April 2021 and my project is delayed, So my project will say come from May 2021, but my obligation to start making payments for the transmission open access would start from 1st April 2020 only. Now, in case the cross-border transmission link is delayed, then the compensation would be decided by respective governments. The governments will sit and discuss what compensation has to be given. In case the transmission lines are delayed, then the central transmission utility will either arrange for an alternative path to transfer the power, or they will have to pay the transmission charges to the generating company. No, this in short, I have tried to cover the guidelines and the regulations which prevail in India for cross-border trade of electricity. And the way forward is like there are multiple benefits of cross-border trade of electricity. The transmission lines can be optimally utilized. The security of supply can be ensured. In fact, when couple of years back, when there was a huge grid disturbance in India, it was the power from Bhutan, hydropower from Bhutan, which helped us in bringing our grid back to normal operation and to make our grid more secure. Otherwise, also if the grid is getting bigger, the market is getting bigger, it become more stable. The interconnections make it more stable. Uh, there is a huge focus on the renewables, on wind and solar, both in India and other SAARC countries also. So what would happen is the generation is intermittent. It's difficult to forecast the generation of these renewable projects. And what we have seen is hydro projects can be used, basically the storage type hydro projects can be used as a reserve to when these renewable generations go down, then we can use these hydro generators to you know to stabilize our grid. Of course, uh, if all these countries are interconnected, we can also avoid or defer investment in generating plants also. If suppose India has a surplus of thermal power, or Bhutan and Nepal have a surplus of hydropower, so instead of India putting up new hydro projects incurring huge costs, the power from Nepal can be brought to India. Or if say Bangladesh requires more power, so instead of putting up more projects in Bangladesh itself, it can think of bringing power from India, which we already are doing. And the cross-border trade in electricity will also help us in developing a single power market, wherein our resources would be optimally utilized. There will be a, if we have to construct lesser number of projects, or suppose if due to import of hydropower India has to use lesser number of coal projects, or there more renewables are integrated into Indian grid, or more renewables are integrated into other SAARC countries, so the environmental costs will decrease substantially. And of course it has economic impact also. If the cheap power flows from India to other countries, or the cheap hydropower comes to India from other countries, people will have access to economical power, the cheaper power. As it is, our per capita energy consumption is amongst the lowest in the world. So if the whole grid is connected, it will have a big impact on this also. And last but not the least, it will also help us in increasing PLF of our stranded capacities. No, but before a market can be formed and the cross-border energy trade happens in a big way, uh, one of the major requirements is there should be a common regulatory framework which should be put in place to facilitate this cross-border trade of electricity. How the energy accounting will happen, how the deviations from the schedules will happen, all these things need to be, you know, thought of. People are already working on that, governments are already working on it, but these things should be in place before cross-border trade of electricity uh, happens in a big way. Now, electricity has a unique property that it cannot be stored. It has to be generated and consumed at the same time. So it brings us with the question of how the grids will operate reliably. How would we how the system operators of different countries will coordinate amongst themselves, how the power will be scheduled, how the protection of grid would be ensured. So all these issues are there. Then, in case there are disputes, how would we settle that dispute? How would the other market, if we are trading through a common power exchange, how market zones would be provided, how so that power flows seamlessly between one country to other country. So all these issues are before us. A beginning has been made where the Indian government has come out with their policies, their regulatory framework is in place. And I think as more and more generators and more buyers connect to Indian grid, and all grids of all these countries are interconnected, we'll find solutions to these issues also. And CBTE will take off in a big way, as it has happened in other places in the world. Virtually all of the Europe is a single market now, so this can very well happen in SAARC countries also. So this was a small presentation from my side. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. And if there are any questions, I would be happy to respond. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abhijit, for your wonderful presentation. We're now opening the forum for the questions. Director SEC has some questions for you, so we'll start with him. Sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Abhijit, for making this wonderful presentation, and thank you very much for being with us today. I have very few, just to open the forum for questions, few small questions which I will ask one by one. Number one is that you said something regarding e-auction
Yes.
coal.
Yes.
Could you please explain it again as to how it is done?
Right.
Keeping in view the objective of saving or conserving the local coal.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So all of us would be aware that coal mining in India is done by Coal India Limited, which has a monopoly over coal mining. It's a government-owned company, and private coal mining, basically by private entities, there are very few instances where some mines have been allocated to private parties, and they use it for their own purpose. So what happens is Coal India signs fuel supply agreements with all the generators here. So there are certain eligibility criteria before Coal India can give you coal. So one of the criteria is that you should have a long-term contract with a public distribution utility here. So if you don't have a long-term contract, uh, Coal India does not give FSAs. Coal India does not give coal to you. So what happens is, recently they have said that even for medium term contracts and for short term contracts, Coal India will sign FSAs. But the pricing part, this coal is being priced at not at a premium, but at basically this is a subsidized coal. The government prices this coal such that the cost of power is lower. So if there is some surplus Coal India, what Coal India does is it also says that if some surplus is left from its mine, then that surplus is being auctioned off to private customers. So the auctioned off coal, the e-auction part, so it's an electronic auction which happens. So that's why it is known as e-auction. So the coal which is auctioned off, it's basically auctioned off at a premium. It's not subsidized coal. So the intent here is, if any Indian generator wants to export electricity, it should not use the subsidized coal. So either you import or you buy coal through auction process.
All right. What you are saying is that if someone buys coal
Correct, sir.
at a premium price,
Right.
then
Correct.
he can use that coal.
Yes.
But at the same time, there may be one other angle is that if you are using the local coal maybe at a premium
Correct,
price
sir.
and you are allowing it for
Right.
exporting or trading electricity, maybe at a premium price, but
Correct.
security of supply for India or maybe for any other country who's producing that coal, will it not be
Right.
compromised? Will it not be
Uh,
compromised?
Sir, no, that's a fair point. So if somebody is auctioning off coal, it may happen that tomorrow the surplus is low and I don't get auction coal. So yeah, that possibility is there. So that's why what we have seen in the case of Bangladesh is, whosoever is exporting power to Bangladesh is using imported coal. So even the Semcop, the Meenakshi Energy, those private generators who are exporting their power, they're using imported coal. So that risk is there. That risk is there. You are right, sir. But yeah, this is how things stand right now. Because India itself,
All right.
for our own domestic generation, Coal India is not able to give full requirement of coal. So that's why they have
Uh,
put it in this clause.
Abhijit, you said that the local coal is subsidized.
Right,
How
sir.
much subsidy is being given by the government of India uh, on per ton of coal produced for power?
So right now I cannot give you a figure offhand, but I'll get back to you. I'll find out
Oh,
and
thank
and
you, thank
let
you.
you
Okay,
know. Yeah.
okay. Thanks. And my second question is that in your presentation you said that there may be 5 years agreement for export or trade of electricity.
Correct.
Uh, if we have 5 years agreement and subsequently in the second year or maybe in the third year,
Right.
the local demand also increases because there is a condition that's subject to the local demand. And in the second year or third year, the
Right. Right.
demand, local demand increases because of many reasons.
Right.
Then what will happen to that agreement which has already been signed for 5 years?
So yeah. The point is that permission is a one-time permission which is given before signing of the contract. So at the time of the signing of the contract, uh, you make certain projections that my demand will grow in such a manner, and it may happen that in second year those projections does not hold true. But I don't have to go to the designated authority every year to get permission or to get their approval for my transaction. Once it has been approved, once I have signed a 5-year contract, the contract will go on for 5 years. Even if the demand figures uh, go up and down, that does not matter. What would happen if in the second year, if some new generator wants to enter into some contract, he may or it may not be able to enter into that contract, but my earlier contract will remain. It will not be affected.
All right.
Yeah.
So you are saying that essentially there is a stability clause in the agreement that whatever has been agreed in the contract will be
Yes.
respected and it will be followed. Okay,
Yes,
thank you. Great.
it will be on.
And another small question that in case of tripartite agreement, uh,
Yes.
uh, country one is exporter of electricity, country two is just transmitting, and country three is the buyer, right?
Right.
In case of transmission losses,
Right, sir.
uh, in country two, in country two,
Right.
what happens and how that transmission losses are addressed or worked out, and what is the average figure of those transmission losses, and how those
Okay.
transmission losses are calculated? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So, sir, right now our Central Electricity Regulatory Commission (CERC) they have given a methodology to calculate the transmission losses for the transmission network. These losses are not very large. The losses are in the range of, I think, 0.5% to it goes up till 1.5%. So this is the typical figure. So they publish these losses every week. It depends on the generation and the demand, which is to be forecasted for the next week. Every Friday these loss figures are published, and the contracts typically are I mean, the sharing of loss typically depends on what type of contract I have. In some contracts, if I say my delivery point is at the X bus, basically meaning at the generator's bus, then the buyer will have to bear these transmission losses. If I say that I have to deliver power at buyer's periphery, at buyer's bus, then it is the generator who bears these losses, and these losses are basically being currently settled in kind.
In kind. All
Yes,
right, not in cash.
not in
Not
cash, not in
not in
cash.
cash. Okay, all right. Is there any provision that it may be either in kind or cash?
Sir, for currently for India, it is published. It is being done in kind only.
Kind.
Going
Okay, all right.
forward, what would happen is
No one knows. All right, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And one another small question is that is this information in the public domain, and how our today's participants of the webinar can obtain that information with reference to these transmission losses, how these losses are
of course,
calculated?
of course.
Is there any, and is there any website, if you can please indicate that, or tell us about that, that from where
Yes.
we can get that information?
So I'll tell you, sir. Yeah, it's all available in public domain. There is an NLDC website. So I'll share the website details with the organizers. So, or either if you go into the Google and search NLDC of India, the website would open, and there, what is the current transmission losses, how the transmission losses are calculated. All this information is available. It's available in the public domain. Anyone can see that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just one question, one more question, then we'll move to the next presentation. So how effective are the guidelines issued in December 2018 by India, and what are the shortcomings and what improvements do you foresee?
Effective, it is quite, it's quite effective, so to say. See, earlier there was no framework, so I would tell from our experience. So we are currently trading 126 megawatt of hydropower from Bhutan into India. So we started this trade in 2014. So when we started this trade, there were no fixed guideline, nothing was there. So we were forced to run from pillar to post, from one ministry to another ministry, to at least to have some sort of approval. I mean, it was even at that point of time, it was not even clear who is the approving authority. But right now, at least there are set rules in the place. Some authorities have been designated, and see, the market would come if there are some merchant generators available in the market. Right now everything is happening on government to government transaction basis, and some Bangladesh has conducted some competitive bidding also. So it's the guidelines would be, I think, is very effective. It gives us a framework, to at least a framework to start trading of power. And once we start making applications for import and export, I mean, the trade would grow. So it is effective. To make it, the second part of the question is, what are the shortcomings? See, I would not say shortcomings, but this is the, I mean, this is being tried for the first time in our part of the world. So there will be challenges once, I mean, see, these guidelines have not been tested enough. So once these guidelines are tested, then we'll find out what are the loopholes, or which I mean, what needs to be corrected. So we'll see once we move along.
Okay. Another question we have received, one of the main concern is to ensure safety and security so that for any fault in one side, electricity interruption does not occur in the other side and vice versa. This can
Correct.
lead to blackout at large scale. What suggestions can you suggest to avoid such situation?
Yeah, so this is a very important point. So what the guidelines have also spoken about, and what the regulations are also indicated, is that for all these things to work successfully, the system operators of all the countries will sit together. The technical guidelines will be evolved, how the grids would be operated, how the fault clearance would happen. So I think from Indian side, it would be CEA, the Central Electricity Authority, who will coordinate with all the system operators, all the designated agencies with other countries. And I think they are in the process of framing some technical guidelines. So these guidelines would ensure that these type of problems do not travel from one country to another. So once those guidelines are in place, we'll have a more fair idea.
Okay. We have one question from Bhutan. There is no dedicated transmission lines for a single project in neighboring country to transmit its energy to India. Under such conditions, what would be the way out to participate in power exchanges, as these countries do not have such dispute settlement regulation also?
Yes, I agree. So for the first part of the question, we do not need a dedicated transmission line to access Indian grid. So a generator in Bhutan who wants to sell power through Indian exchanges can connect to the Bhutanese network. Bhutanese network is already connected to the Indian network. So power flow per se is not a problem. We can use that. We can use the already existing interconnections. For the dispute settlement, what we have seen in our agreement, or with agreements with Bangladesh, is that people usually uh, agree to have a arbitration clause in place, where the arbitration would happen in either in Singapore or in some other mutually agreed place. So all these things are very flexible, so and are in the state of evolution. So once it is done, it will happen. But accessing Indian power exchanges is not an issue right now. We don't need to have a dedicated transmission line. There are meters put up in Indian interconnection with Bhutan. There would be meters put in place at the generating end, so the energy counting will happen. So that is not an issue.
Okay. One more question. Can you please explain how competitive bidding is done for the purchase of power from external sources?
Yeah, so it's a very simple process. In a nutshell, the government of India has notified some standard bidding documents, where the standard power purchase agreement has also been notified. So if any transmission, any distribution utility in India wants to purchase power, it calls for a competitive bidding, and it's a open bidding, where any generator who wants to supply power to that utility submits it's a two-part tariff bid, where everyone has to quote their fixed charge and their variable charges. So whosoever quotes the lowest wins the bid. So the competitive bidding, which is happening right now in India, it's a reverse auction type of bidding. It happens in two stages. In first stage, you submit your financial bids. So whosoever quotes the lowest in the first round, that becomes the initial price offer. Then the reverse auction starts, where the lowest price, suppose there are three generators and the lowest price quoted is 4 rupees. So 4 rupees becomes the initial price offer, and now everyone has to quote below 4 rupees to get the contract. So it's a time bound bidding, 120 minutes are being allocated. So within the bidding window, whosoever quotes the lowest wins the bid. So this is how competitive bidding is happening here in India. Bangladesh also did a competitive bidding where it was more of a bucket filling principle, where say if 5 generators have submitted their financial bid, so all these bids are arranged in a descending order, uh, in ascending order, and smallest to largest, and the utility goes on picking the generators till its demand is met. So this is how there are two models of competitive bidding which basically operates here.
And we have also received a question from Pakistan. You have used short-term open access, medium-term open access, and long-term open access arrangements for power purchase sale. Could you please differentiate between these terms and what is the significance of open access?
Right. So short-term, medium-term, or open access or long-term open access, it basically means for what period you get this uh, authority to use the transmission network. So suppose my contract is for a period of 2 months, so I need to have permission to use the transmission network for a period of 2 months only. So any open access which is for a period of less than 1 year. So basically, if I sign a contract with a transmission utility for a period of less than 1 year, it is known as a short-term open access contract. If I want to use the transmission network, say for a period of more than 1 year, uh, till for a period of 5 years. So for a period of 1 year to 5 years, it has been defined as a medium-term contract, and for a period of more than 5 years till 25 years, it is a long-term contract. So this is how these contracts have been defined. So it basically depends for what period you want to use the transmission network.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Abhijit, for your time. And we'll now move to the second presentation. Yeah, thank you. Moving on to the second session of this webinar, we have been joined by Mr. Salis Osman from National Transmission and Dispatch Company, Pakistan. Mr. Salis is currently working as General Manager Power System Planning in NTDC, Pakistan. He graduated in electrical engineering in 1985. He has worked in different departments of NTDC, including project monitoring, planning, purchasing and inventory control, design, Central Power Purchasing Agency, and power system planning. He's also worked for USAID Power Distribution Program, Saudi Electric Company, and SAARC Energy Center. He's also led the team responsible for preparation of indicative generation capacity expansion plan 2018 to 2040. He conceived, designed, and produced first ever distance learning certificate course in South Asia on power system planning and analysis from the platform of Virtual University of Pakistan. Mr. Salis has also got 5 research papers and publications to his credit. Over to you, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm already excited about it, and I look forward to share my knowledge. And let me also acknowledge the last presentation. It was very useful, and I'm aware of these guidelines on cross-border trade by India, and these are very important for Pakistan because Pakistan is also going to follow the whole process, inshallah ta'ala, in the coming years. So I think my detailed introduction has already been done. I should be coming to the topic directly. And my focus is on 6 items. First, I will start from an introduction to NTDC, National Transmission and Dispatch System. And then I will come to rationale for regional energy connectivity. I will briefly touch SAARC Energy Ring as well. And then something about CASA, which is the flagship project for Pakistan as far as cross-border electricity trade is concerned. And then I have very brief suggestion, my own scheme to cope with the power sector challenges. So coming on to the first item, that is introduction to NTDC system. So NTDC is basically the principal transmission company in Pakistan power sector. Apart from NTDC, K Electric is also a transmission company, which is basically a vertically integrated company. And there is another Sindh transmission company turned up about 3-4 months back. They have been issued license. So there are distribution companies, 10 distribution companies, and then consumer. This is the hierarchy of Pakistan power sector. And transmission basically is the responsibility of NTDC, and we believe that we are the backbone of Pakistan power sector. This is the situation here. If you see that existing system, this 2020, we have got total 61 grid stations and 53,410 MVA capacity. But the important information in this slide is that during the next 5 years, we are going to double up our numbers, almost double up our numbers. So we'll be going to 99 grid stations. We will have new voltage levels of 765 kV, then DC voltage and HVDC, and then CASA, the cross-border project also. So it's a big challenge during the next 5 years. We are going to see, and we are upbeat about it. The whole team of NTDC is quite excited about this thing, and there are too many different interventions going on within the department to be prepared with all this challenging development plan over the next 5 years. So let me apprise you about our long-term forecast for next 20 years. If you see the red number, the middle column, that is the normal scenario with 5.5% GDP growth for Pakistan. You will see that by 2028, we'll be requiring about 40,000 plus megawatts in our system. And I'm going to the next slide where we are showing you this demand for the year 2040. So in 2040, we'll be requiring, as per this load forecast, long-term forecast, we'll be requiring 80,000 plus megawatts. Now I'm coming to rationale for regional energy connectivity, for particularly first for Pakistan, and then I will come to SAARC. If you see the major features of our generation plan, which we have prepared last year from 2019 to 2040, there are 5 features. First is that massive utilization of hydropower will be going from 29% to 40%. Secondly, we are going to balance the overall basket price with a high share of indigenous coal, local coal, Thar coal, from 2% to 25%. It's a big change. And then we are very happy that we'll be achieving indigenous mix dominated by indigenous resources, less reliance on imported fuel, that is coal, RLNG and RFO, from 48% to 13%. The fourth is renewable accounts for the overall share of 16% of the installed capacity. Today we are about 4 to 5%. So during the next 20 years, we aim to have 16%. Remember that this is before the launch of the new ARE policy 2020, which asks us to have 30% of the renewable resources of installed capacity. It's a big target, and already we are in the final stage of updating our plan. Within next 2 years, we'll be next 2 weeks, we are supposed to update our plan to 2047. So by 9,000 megawatts are going to be retired by 2040. So based on this, if you see this is the generation mix of Pakistan by the year 2040 after 20 years. And my point is that we are rich in hydro, and thermal is reduced in terms of foreign fuel, because most of this 40% of thermal fuel is dominated by Thar coal, local coal. The nuclear is steady, 4%, renewables are about 16%, and that makes the energy generation mix of Pakistan over the years next 20 years. So you see, if I come back to this slide, you just see that it's ideal. We are very happy about it, but there is one aspect missing in this jigsaw, and that is the cross-border electricity trade, interconnections and trade, because this portion is very important. And in this generation mix pie chart, we have included our CASA project, CASA 1000 project in the hydro part, but we are hoping that we will have more interventions as far as cross-border interconnections are concerned. By the year 2047, we should have significant part of the energy coming from across the border. So there is another very important point with respect to the potential for cross-border regional interconnections, cross-border trading. You see that during 5 months from November, starting from November to March, our demand variation is quite low. It comes only 60%, around 60%. So that means we have got a potential of exporting energy during these 5 months from November to March. Though the hydropower is reduced because of the winter and because of the glaciers on the hills of mountains, but even then we have got a reasonable part of energy available, which is of course surplus, and we can sell it to across the border. And there is one important point that we are already taken into the middle of certain interventions to increase our demand in the winter season, so that we can improve our demand situation, supply situation in real terms. So this is the slide for rationale for energy connectivity for Pakistan. The first is that energy security due to diversity with respect to cross-border interconnection will definitely improve. And that, as I said about a couple of minutes ago, that our pie chart, our generation mix lacks cross-border interconnection, cross-border trading. That will enhance our energy security if we go for this regional connectivity. Second is generation adequacy. That will definitely improve. And the third is optimal utilization of available resources. The previous resource person from India was also talking of this thing, that our investment can be avoided or at least delayed if we are importing power from across the border. And same goes opposite direction. When we are exporting, the other country, the receiving end, their investment will be either avoided or delayed. Number 4 is very important. This is the, I was talking a little bit earlier, that interconnections offer opportunities to Pakistan for exporting energy when surplus, particularly in winter when demand is low. That is from November to March every year. So now this is a slide for basically the SAARC system. And I have prepared this slide based on the World Bank study based on the data for year 2013-14. And you see that we have divided India into, I think, about 5 portions. And you will see that from these monthly load profiles, in January, Bangladesh is with low demand, Bhutan is with high demand, India eastern part is with low demand, and then Pakistan is with low demand. Similarly, in February, the situation, then March and April, May, June, you'll see that from June onwards, the situation is very lucrative in the sense of regional interconnectivity. When we have too many greens and too many reds, so that means the green means the demand is low and the red means the demand is high. So red and green can be matched for July, June, July, August, and September as well. Then gradually it reduces. October is very bad in this aspect. There is no green available. So that is so if you see that, if theoretically speaking, if we are not talking at this stage for physical interconnections and all these and the commercial arrangements, all these things, but the potential to either to import the power or vice versa, or corresponding exporting the power is all the year. Most of that in most of the month it is there, but particularly during the summer season when usually the demand is high. So a few examples of regional interconnections I wanted to share with you. In Middle East Gulf Cooperation Council for Interconnection Authority, GCCIA, which includes the Middle East states, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. They are already connected, and they are actually providing support with respect to the reserve, mainly for the reserves. Then there is a European example, a big, very renowned example, European network of transmission system operators for electricity. Then Pakistan is also busy with Central Asian states, including Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, and Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, to have an interconnection with each other, mainly to enhance the utilization of available renewable energy resources. With that, we can provide reserve support to each of the countries. So now coming to SAARC Energy Ring, we are all very familiar with this energy ring, and there are too many options. And based on this, there was a study by Asian Development Bank in probably in 2014 or 15. So we have different interconnections here available. Certain are already matured, particularly with respect to, I would like to highlight India, Bangladesh, and India, Bhutan, as well as India, Nepal. India, Sri Lanka, I'm sure that they are too eager, both the parties are eager, and they are looking for some economical options. India, Pakistan is due to administrative or certain other issues. We have not been able to mature it, but look forward to have it in the coming years, inshallah ta'ala. And then Kasta 1000 is there. So these are this interconnections and cross-border electricity trade within South Asia is a big opportunity in this sense. And this is the slide I have prepared just to show you the maturity and the viableness of this regional connectivity, starting from utilizing that optimal utilization of available resources will be there. Then we can develop a strong economy across the region with good jobs, good number of jobs, modern infrastructure, and proper social services. Then number 3 is facilitating clean power export revenues for the certain member states, and by reducing electricity shortage in other member states. So this is where the energy power is not available, we can export, import, and then both the sides, it will be a win-win situation for all the member states in this respect. Number 4 is delivering reliable, affordable electricity to parts of the world that need it in summer and winter, whenever there is demand is high. For example, in Bhutan, Bhutan exports most of its power to India in summer, but they need power in winter from India because they are mainly rich. They are very rich with hydropower, but in winter, the hydropower is not available. So last is prompting inter-regional cooperation, investments in social services, and encourage community benefit sharing. This is which is a huge benefit. So now I'm coming to the CASA 1000 project. You see that these are the salient features of the project. Supplies surplus Central Asian power in the summer from May to September. So this is restricted to these 5 months. Mainly it was a share of 300 megawatt for Afghanistan and rest 1000 for Pakistan. Then confirmed delivery of 4000 gigawatt hour of energy or above. Sometimes in the wet years, it's more than 4000 gigawatt hour. A World Bank study declared CASA project as viable and beneficial. Despite the security risks in Afghanistan, we are hoping, inshallah ta'ala, situation will improve in Afghanistan with respect to security. And then this project and many other projects will, inshallah ta'ala, be mature. So HVDC lines from Sanktuda in Tajikistan passing through Kunduz and Pule Khumri, Kabul, Jalalabad in Afghanistan and end up in Peshawar, Pakistan. The total length of transmission line is 750 kilometers, 16% of would pass through Tajikistan, 75% of the lines through Afghanistan, and rest 99% through Pakistan. So it's a wonderful project and involving different countries of Central Asia and South Asia. This is a figure I'm very quick because I have got too much other information, but I'm sure the presentation will be shared with the participants over the webinar. And this is a very interesting figure which showing what is available in terms of transmission lines at this stage and what is going to be, inshallah ta'ala, constructed in the coming years. This is the scope. I've already described it, But in a little bit detail, the 750 kilometer of 500 kV HVDC through Afghanistan, then converters HVDC converter station at Sankuta, 1000 megawatt, and Kabul 300 megawatt and Peshawar each, and then over 477 kilometer 500 kV AC link between Kyrgyz Republic, Datka, and Tajikistan, Khojar. So AC system upgrades on existing line because the existing AC system is already available and it will be upgraded to 500 kV. Then this is very important slide that Kasa 1000 will supply power in summer months. I've already highlighted this factor. The second is for the remaining period. These countries, and of course Pakistan, along with these countries, have planned to use the Kasa system under open access provision. With that, Pakistan has also offered Russian side to participate in the Kasa system through open access regime for the effective utilization of the Kasa system. This is, I'm talking of rest of the 7 months, because for the 5 months from May to September, it will be, power will be flowing from Central Asia to South Asia. The Kasa system, number 4, is capable for reverse flow of energy. So Pakistan envisions to sell back the energy during winter months. That's when demand is low in Pakistan. I have already talked about earlier part of my presentation. So project would pave the way. This is a big long-term strategic benefit that this particular project, Kasa 1000, would pave the way for Kasa REN, Kasa Regional Electricity Market. And this market, inshallah ta'ala, will be connected with SAARC market. So regions, both the regions, this Central Asia and South Asia, will be combined in view of these two markets. We are very hopeful that this will happen in the coming maybe 4 to 5 years, inshallah. So current status of 1000 megawatt Kasa project is, it is, I think it's too much detail about minor details about it. The important thing is that we are going to have COD in December 22 of this Kasa project, which is important for us. It's 1000 megawatt, and we are very optimistic about it. To have it, we are actually enthusiastic in terms of having another color to our energy mix, that is of cross-border interconnections and regional interconnection. So this is the all progress. So the land is still under process, the first problem, but most of these issues have been resolved. And I'm not going into detail because I just want to now share my scheme to cope with the power sector challenges in the coming days. It's very brief. There are only 5 points. The first is that I would like to see adding cheap, clean megawatts capacity through indigenous resources and as well as indigenous technology. This is important. Second is make and sustain the grid smart. We need to have our grid as a smart one so that the value of the money and the value of the hours and efforts is achieved in the most optimal manner. The third is that interventions for the low-hanging fruit are critical. That is energy efficiency and energy conservation. We need to, this is once again, we are going to attack through these energy efficiency and energy conservation to get the maximum value of the money and the efforts on the part of professionals. Number 4 is regional interconnections to cater shortages as well as surplus. Wherever there is shortage, if I'm connected, if Pakistan is connected with other countries, including Afghanistan and India, then that means that whenever there is a shortage, we can have power import from these countries, our neighboring countries, and whenever there is a surplus, we can sell, we can import the power so that we can optimally utilize the resources in all the countries, in all the member states of SAARC. So my view on SAARC initiatives is, I think since I have worked for SAARC Energy Center as well for about 5 years as program leader energy trade, I believe that domestic energy development and bilateral cooperation alone, which is available today, will not solve the power crisis of South Asia. All these engagements have to be multilateral to get the maximum benefit of being a community, being a region of close friends, and close the nations and the people who cared about each other. I think engagements have to be multilateral. Whenever we are able to convert the existing bilateral cooperation into multilateral, I'm sure we will be getting the benefit of this wonderful platform of SAARC. Thank you so much. And now I'm available for all questions. And so if there are difficult questions, I will try to answer. And if there are easy questions, I will be very quick. I'm just joking. So I'm available for all kind of questions and to more deliberating more on these aspects.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation. We have questions from Pakistan. What is the outlook of cross-border trade in next 3 years, next 5 years, and in next 10 years? So 3 different timelines.
Actually, we have prepared a national plan for next 20 years. And in short term, we are very hopeful that this CASA, by the year 2022, December, we have got this COD. So we will start from this CASA. And our next plan, 2047, is to be finalized within next 2 weeks. And I would not be, I'm not able to actually disclose the further plans for further cross-border interconnection projects other than this CASA. But we do have some plans, and we are looking forward to this IGCP Indicative Generation Capacity Expansion Plan, which will be finalized in 2 weeks, and we are going to submit it to our regulator, NEPRA, so that once it is approved, then we'll be able to talk about more interventions. So we are not talking of very long term. Next 2.5 years, we'll be having CASA, and then things will start in real sense with regards to cross-border interconnections for Pakistan. I hope it is connected, and some more questions will be there.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. So, sir, the next question is, are there any guidelines in Pakistan for cross-border electricity trade? And if not, is there anything in pipeline?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, at this stage, we don't have guidelines like India had done. I think it's about 3 years ago when India had approved these guidelines. And we are aware of these things. We are actually in the process of revamping our grid code and other regulatory instrument. And during the next 1 year, we are hoping to have this thing, because it starts from the policy, and we are not having, other than this CASA, we are not policy-wise focused on cross-border interconnections. But lately, there have been quite a few discussions and meetings on these initiatives. We are going to have new electricity policy in place, and which emphasizes on cross-border electricity and cross-border power interconnections. So based on that policy, which is expected to be in place maximum by June this year, another 3 months, and then we'll be focusing on these guidelines and other regulatory instruments pertaining to cross-border power trade and cross-border power interconnections.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Salih Saab. I am Naeem Malik, and thank you very much for your presentation. Very useful presentation, very valuable, and also for being with us. I would like to ask you one question.
Sure.
That you spoke about generation change in energy mix for power generation, but you did not explain as to how that power will be transmitted. Is there anything regarding transmission?
Yes, I think it's a very important thing.
Even right now, you have surplus capacity generation, but you have transmission issue. So what are we doing about Pakistan is doing about the transmission? and to make it efficient.
Yes,
Please.
thank you so much, sir. And first of all, we're highly grateful for the invitation, for your comments. I think it's very important for me. And let me tell you that in next 2 months, next 2 weeks, we are going to finalize our generation plan. And with that, we are already working on our transmission system expansion plan up till 2030. And efforts are in place with the consultation of JICA. And they have engaged consultants for the last 8 to 10 months. They are working with us. And the major input for this transmission plan will be IGCP 2047, which is going to be finalized in 2 months. But having said that, that doesn't mean that we will start the work after the finalization of generation plan. Actually, the transmission plan process is started, and by June we will have a comprehensive report on our transmission system expansion plan. But otherwise, on a short-term basis, it's very important to inform you that in winter we start all the time. Every year we start, but last 2 years we have taken quite extraordinary efforts with respect to removing our constraints in the transmission systems. We are very confident that, like last year, we will not be having any major bottlenecks or constraints in the coming summer. We are very hopeful about it. We have done too much work, particularly in the south where there were trippings, particularly in winter, and whenever there was a high load months in summer as well. So we are very confident that in the next summer season and in the coming years, as a medium-term basis, based on our transmission system expansion plan 2030, we are very confident that all the power will be appropriately, amicably evacuated to the load centers.
Another question, if you have that information available with you, can you share with us per unit cost of generation of electricity from different fuels? Like we can take major fuels like gas, LNG, and local coal, and
Yes.
and hydro.
Yes, actually, you are talking the complete tariff, and right now I don't have this information because this is actually catered by Central Power Purchasing Agency. But I'm sure I can get this information and I can share it with SAARC Energy Center, and maybe in about 2-3 days I can get it and pass it on to you, inshallah.
Sarasab, you would appreciate that while you are proposing that few stations or few sources of electricity generation will become redundant or will be forced to become redundant, the basic information on which those have to be declared redundant is the cost of production of electricity. I hope while making this presentation or presenting your recommendations to the government, these things have been kept in mind. Thank you.
Sir, grateful. Just wanted to tell you one thing, just want to add one thing, that 9,000 megawatt are going to be retired during the plan period. And we are we are not happy with this, but other way we are very happy that because most of this 9,000, almost 100% of this 9,000 megawatt comes from thermal imported fuel. So we are happy that these 9,000 megawatt will also be replaced with the hydro, with the local coal, and with the renewable energy. So we are not worried about the retirement because they have already completed their useful life as per their main contracts, power purchase agreements.
We have another question from Bhutan. What are the plans and programs for further strengthening of transmission system in Pakistan, and any plan to synchronize the whole country in near future?
Actually, by the way, our system in Pakistan is already integrated. And apart from Karachi, we are connected with Karachi, but just to export power, around about 800 megawatts we are exporting. But rest all the country is interconnected. It's an integrated system. And as I said, that we are going to have a wonderful plan for transmission system expansion plan. It will be a long-term plan, and by June we look forward to finalize it. And this will actually be covering our other very important projects. One is to maximize the value of transmission. The second is this HVDC Matiari project, HVDC project going on. That is also part of it. So I look forward that as far as transmission planning is concerned, we are, alhamdulillah, very close to a great plan. And already the government has assured to full assistance in all senses, as well as NAPRA has supported us for the implementation of this plan. So I look forward that by mid of this year, we will have a comprehensive plan, and efforts will be in place to have a great implementation process and to get the maximum value of the money and the megawatts and MVA capacity over the transmission lines.
Next question is, can you please explain the permitted losses for CASA 1000 project?
I'm sorry, I have to see it, and I have to open the documents. I have certain slides in detail, but losses are not included in that. So for tariff, I have got a few slides available, and since I'll be sharing this presentation, people can see it. But I have noted that I can share the losses details as well with you later. Maybe after this session, I can email values to you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the next question is from Nepal. He's saying, in your presentation, you showed that there is an excess of power in Pakistan, while at the same time there is power shortage in Nepal. So how can we move forward with the interconnection between Pakistan and Nepal? If you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, I think it has been our dream. I was in SAARC Energy Center, and I'm sure the dream is still there, that we envisioned one project by the name of NEPA, and I recall that large hydropower project in Nepal, and from there we can generate power from Nepal at Chisapani, Karnali River, and then the power was to come to India and then to Pakistan and Afghanistan. The same line can be used for reversing the power to exporting the power to Nepal, particularly in the winter months. But I would say there's one correction I would like to say, that we don't have surplus capacity, but we do have surplus energy with us. There is a difference. There's a difference that capacity means that across 12 months we have extra power available with us. In summer, we don't have extra power available with us, but apart from the summer peak months, we do have here and there, we do have sufficient amount of energy available as surplus. So winter, particularly from November to March, we can export energy to Nepal. And I would suggest that SAARC Energy Center should come up with this study to see this sufficiently large amount of electrical energy available in Pakistan in winter to pass through India and to go, and so that we can benefit our Nepalese brothers, particularly in the winter months.
So, one final question is there any upcoming power exchange in Pakistan?
Yes, actually we are a little bit late, and we are all inspired by Indian experience, Indian Energy Exchange. And the good point is that we are going to launch the bilateral competitive market on 1st of October 2021. It's about 1.5 year time. And there are too many prerequisites on the part of NTDC and other power sector corporatized entities, including Central Power Purchasing Agency. And we are hoping that that will be the start of competitive market, of course, from the bilateral. And then ultimately we will have a free market I would say around 25, 26, there will be a power exchange in Pakistan. We have got the plan, but the first step is a bilateral competitive market, which is going to be set up, commissioned from 1st of October next year.
Sir, for your time. Thank you again on behalf of SAARC Energy Center for joining us today.
Highly
The audience
grateful.
will now move to the third presentation. Our next presenter is Mr. Sher Singh Bhatt, Chief Executive of Kabeli Energy Limited, a private sector hydropower developer. Mr. Sher Singh holds a Bachelor of Technology in Electrical Engineering and Master of Business Administration degrees. He has previously worked as Deputy Managing Director of Nepal Electricity Authority, vertically integrated national utility of Nepal. He has about 36 years of working experience in the sector in almost all elements of value chain. Including planning, generation, transmission, system operation, power trade, etc. He has been involved in drafting, negotiation, drafting and negotiating domestic and cross-border power purchase as well as transmission service agreements. He has been a member of various national delegations for bilateral meetings regarding cross-border infrastructure and power trade, including the Power Trading Agreement 2014 between India and Nepal. Over to you, sir.
Screen. I'm not getting my screen. Screen down. This my documents. My documents. Cross-border. Five. Hello. Hello.
Hello. We can hear you.
So, okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, let me thank Salis and Abhijit for their wonderful presentation. And in these two presentations, they have really explained how cross-border power trade is important for bridging the deficiencies and harness the opportunities of regarding electricity in the SAARC member states. So I need not to make more justification of the importance of cross-border power trade among the SAARC member states. I will not include any statistics, technical details, and procedures in my presentation because all the first two presentations have covered all these things. So my presentation will be very short, and it will be regarding my impressions of the status of cross-border power trade in SAARC member states, what has happened in past, and what can happen in future. So it is my impression only. It is not a country presentation. So many of you may agree or may not agree with my impression. So first of all, the electricity is a very typical commodity. It has a specific nature. So the cross-border power trade of cross-border trade of electricity is different than other commodities because the electricity is an intangible commodity and it cannot be shown at the custom point for custom clearance. It cannot be stored and has to be consumed at the moment it is generated, and it needs a hardwire connection from point of generation to point of consumption. The item list of general trade agreements between or among the states excludes electricity due to these specific natures of this commodity. So for the trade of electricity across the border, we have to have typical agreements between and among the cross-border trade among the countries participating in the trade cross-border trade of electricity. Prerequisites for cross-border trade of electricity, there are certain prerequisites. You need a separate bilateral or sub-regional or regional agreements for cross-border trade of electricity. You need an agreed market mechanism or market rules by trading parties, agreed by trading parties, and a requisite transmission fabric of hardware between among the countries or between the countries. Now the question is, why do states wish cross-border trade of electricity? So I understand that there are three objectives in my understanding. The first objective is balancing or managing surplus and deficit of seasonal time of the day and seasonal demand and supply in the national power system of the SAARC member states. Trading in with this objective, the balancing the system objective, the trading is relatively in smaller volumes and for shorter period. Second objective of the cross-border power trade is to harness the energy sources available as comparative advantage in SAARC member states for export of electricity and to attain the economic growth through it. The different SAARC member states have different sources of energy, say coal, gas, and hydro. So they have their comparative advantage. These advantages can be harnessed for export of electricity and economic growth. With this objective, the trading is intended for relatively larger volumes and it is in long term. The third objective may be take advantage of price arbitrage in the two national markets. If the price of electricity in two national markets is different, there is an arbitrage. The electricity, cross-border electricity trade can be used to take benefit of this arbitrage. Now let's go to another slide. That's the cross-border trading of electricity among SAARC member states. What is the status now? Currently, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Nepal are having cross-border transaction of electricity with India, but this transaction is mostly under G2G facilitation. Most power transactions with India are routed through Indian public sector trader NVVN. India have demonstrated strong preference to bilateral G2G model for cross-border transaction of power. Transaction between any other two countries needs use of Indian transmission system because they are not directly connected except with India. But SAARC member states have not been successful to garner this support from India. So level of cross-border trading of electricity in SAARC region is not up to mark. Indian preference for bilateral G2G model is impeding electrically interconnected SAARC region as a whole. Despite this status, there have been certain initiatives to enhance the electricity trade among SAARC member states. So despite poor regional connectivity and trading of electricity, initiatives undertaken in following four directions to enhance the level of electricity trade among SAARC member states. The first dimension is regional and bilateral agreements for energy cooperation and trade of electricity. There have been initiatives in this dimension. Another dimension, development of requisite cross-border infrastructure for connectivity and trade. Third dimension is ramification of domestic systems of SAARC member states to adapt cross-border power trade. And fourth dimension is regional and bilateral instruments to gear up connectivity and trade through frequent communications. If you look at the agreement for energy cooperation and trade of electricity, the first dimension. At the regional level, SAARC Intergovernmental Framework Agreement on Energy Cooperation was signed in 2011. So this is a regional level agreement for trade of electricity. It's energy cooperation. Similarly, at bilateral level, an umbrella agreement on cooperation between India and Bhutan has been signed. Power trade agreement between Nepal and India is signed. Agreement between Bangladesh and India for cooperation is also signed. So these are three bilateral level instruments signed. One regional instrument is there. Similarly, there have been initiatives and developments in requisite cross-border infrastructure development. So if we look at the cross-border infrastructure between India and Bhutan, there is a 400 kV double circuit line in operation between Tala and New Siliguri via Kolga and Binaguri. There is another line, 400 kV double circuit line in operation, that is between Tala and New Siliguri through another route. Similarly, between India and Nepal, Muzaffarpur Dhalkebar 400 kV double circuit line is in operation, but still in the radial mode. The two systems are not yet synchronized. So this 400 kV line charged at 132 kV now, and getting ready to charge it at its a design voltage level, but still it is operating in radial mode. Between Bangladesh and India, Behrampur, Bedamara 400 kV DC back to back, it is in operation. Between India and Sri Lanka, Madurai Anuradhapur 400 kV HVDC bipole, that includes Dhanushkodi, Talimanar, submarine cable also. This has been in discussion for a long time, but still it is at the conceptual level. There have to be explored financing sources for this. Third dimension is ramification of domestic systems to adapt cross-border power trade. That includes amendments in domestic regulations of the SAARC member states to facilitate the cross-border power trade. Ministry of Power, Government of India memo of December 2018 on cross-border imports and exports. So this is an amendment that is a ramification on domestic regulations to allow cross-border power trade. Reinforcements of domestic infrastructure. Second part is reinforcement in Muzaffarpur substation, because after the completion of Muzaffarpur-Dhalkebar transmission line between Nepal and India, the Indian system on the transmission lines and the substation part has been reinforced to adapt this Muzaffarpur-Dhalkebar 400 kV line. So there have been some certain reinforcement in the internal systems also. So, but these reinforcements are not sufficient. And the fourth dimension is instruments to accelerate the connectivity and trade. At the regional level, SAARC Energy Expert Group has not was formed. It is not very effective now. Similarly, at the bilateral level, there have been joint steering committees, joint working groups, joint technical committee formed under the respective bilateral agreements between India and Bhutan, India and Nepal, and India and Bangladesh. So the third level is domestic level working groups. So domestic task forces have been formed to support the bilateral and regional working groups. So these domestic groups task forces will support the bilateral or regional task forces or working groups. So it has been observed that the bilateral instruments have been functional, but the regional instruments are almost defunct. Now, my impression of reasons for poor connectivity and trading among SAARC member states. The first is geographical proximities not supportive for cross-border trade. Except Afghanistan, all SAARC member states have common border with India. but no other two countries have common borders except Pakistan and Afghanistan. India is at the kingpin position for cross-border trade of electricity among SAARC member states, but because this is the only state that has connectivity with most of the other SAARC member states, then the infrastructure is another issue. Certain cross-border infrastructure has been developed between India and other few countries in last few years to facilitate bilateral trade with India, but this also does not facilitate third country trade or regional trade. The Ministry of Power, Government of India memo of December 2018 provides certain opportunity for this, but it has to be tested practically how it works. The third issue is careful Indian move. India has been treating electricity as a strategic commodity with its neighbors. For that reason, India has a strong preference over bilateral trade in G2G model. India has been ring-fencing its domestic market through internal regulations, allowing limited access to selected SAARC member states to it, and that also through G2G facilitation. Another factor of very poor state of cross-border trade among the SAARC member states is geopolitical relation factor. Indo-Pakistan geopolitical relations are not supportive to regional trade of electricity. Indian bidders, maybe in service providers or developers, are in negative list in international bids in Pakistan. Due to this, India seemingly adopts bilateral G2G option to reciprocate it in electrical connectivity and trade. So this is a picture showing geographical proximities not supportive for cross-border trade. You can see that except Afghanistan, all other SAARC member states have their common borders with India, but except Afghanistan and Pakistan, no other two countries have common borders. So any third country trade of electricity has to go through India. Besides this, as I have already told, that India has been at the kingpin position. So Indian policies related to cross-border trade have not been very consistent. These inconsistent policies have impeded the level of cross-border trade of electricity. If you look at Indian import policy 2009 to 2014, it classified electricity as import restricted item. So that means the market was concealed for import from other countries, almost concealed. Then in 2011, we had a SAARC summit, and India signed SAARC Intergovernmental Framework Agreement on Energy Cooperation, but remained almost reluctant to gear it up. It did not result. So positive signal was given, but there was a pushback in action. Indian import policy 2014 to 19, electricity was excluded from the list of import restricted items. It was a positive signal. Then India and Nepal, Indo-Nepal Power Trade Agreement was signed in 2014. India signed the Power Trade Agreement with Nepal in 2014, but remained reluctant to actually implement it. A positive signal was given, but there was a pullback in action. Increased export to Nepal through 400 kV Dhalkebara-Muzaffarpur line. The volume of export to Nepal increased, but all export was routed through NVVN, intercepting the export through PTC in past. In past, Nepal was importing through PTC, but after commissioning of 400 kV Dhalkebara-Muzaffarpur line, all the export was routed through NVVN. That is all complete G2G model. Ministry of Power, Government of India memo of December 18, 2018. These internal guidelines are seemingly allowing export of power by neighboring countries to India and to third market through Indian grid seems a push forward. It was a positive signal, but if you look at the Union Budget of India 2020, it plans to impose border adjustment tax on import of electricity in India. This tax, I have not seen at what rate this tax will be charged, but in past it has been demonstrated that such tax would be around 2 rupees, 2 Indian rupees per unit. And if it is so, then the internal regulations open the market, open the access to Indian market. But this is again then tariff restriction. Because of this tariff, because this border adjustment tax, the generation from neighboring countries will not get the purchasers in Indian market, because the border adjustment tax will increase the per unit cost of import from other countries. So the policies have been very inconsistent. Internal regulations have been inconsistent. So that doesn't give confidence to neighboring the SAARC member states to harness their resources for export to Indian market or regional trade. So with this, my concluding impression is selected SAARC member states already making power transition with India under bilateral G2G arrangement, using this opportunity for objective number 1, that is balancing the system. This is being done now. India is moving very carefully on opening its domestic market to neighboring SAARC member states. A good experience and a comfortable situation on bilateral G2G transactions may lead to third country transactions among selected and limited SAARC member states in future. Once India agrees to provide its transmission system for third country transactions of selected limited SAARC member states in practical terms, such SAARC member states can exercise objective number 2, that is harnessing the resources for economic growth. With these two experiences, India might open its domestic market to selected limited SAARC member states, and then trading for third objective, that is price arbitrage, may be realized. But SAARC regional power exchange, SAARC regional electricity market, SAARC regional grid have been and may remain as good academic exercise for long time in future also, unless there is a dramatic change in geopolitical relations among SAARC member states. Although trading among selected limited SAARC member states may grow in accordance with the Indian preference, but very slowly. So with that, I close my presentation. It was an impression, as I already told you, that many of you may agree or may not agree. It's my impression. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your presentation and taking your time out for this webinar. We'll now move to the questions. The first question is, what is the total quantum of electricity import to Nepal, and what is the average basket price of imported electricity in US cents per kilowatt hour?
Import of electricity from India to Nepal, imported electricity by Nepal from India varies seasonally. Now, our run-of-the-river hydropower projects, we have attained a good progress in these projects. So, during the rainy season, during the wet season, the import is around 300 to 400 megawatt. But that also generally in the peak time, because in the off-peak time now Nepal is about to meet its requirements. But in the dry season, the import goes up to 500 megawatt, and that also round the clock. As you asked about the per unit price of electricity, that varies year to year, depends on the suppliers to NVVN. So most that is around 5 cents, around 5 cents, less than 5 cents, not exactly 5 cents, but that varies.
Okay, sir. So the next question is, what is the status of Nepal Power Exchange Limited formed by IPPs, and how it will facilitate Nepal energy sector?
The Nepal power sector currently, the public sector generation and the private sector generation, is about to supersede the public sector generation. Many other projects are in the pipeline. So it's very clear that in near future, the private sector generation will supersede the public sector generation, and then Nepal is will face the challenge to manage its off-peak surplus during the wet season. Hello. Hello.
Sir.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah. Sir, can you please repeat the answer? I think we lost the connection. What is the status of Nepal Power Exchange Limited formed by IPPs and how it will facilitate Nepal energy sector?
Yeah, in Nepal's total generation, private sector. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So in Nepal's total generation portfolio, private sector generation has almost superseded the public sector generation, and in near future it will be almost double of the public sector generation. So now we are the Nepalese public sector is signing a take or pay PPA with all the private generators, and they might face a challenge managing their off-peak surplus during the wet season.
Okay, so the next question is, do you foresee in future any chance of increased power trade between South Asia and East Asia, keeping in view the distributed generation?
As I demonstrated in my presentation, that because in the SAARC region now limited and selected countries are having power transactions with India, and the whole region is moving in a split way. Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, that is BBIN. So they are exercising their bilateral trade, and maybe in their future they might go for a third country trade also. Similarly, it is on the eastern side of SAARC region. On the western side of SAARC region, Pakistan is at the advanced level of its negotiations and transactions with through this CASA 1000. So the whole SAARC region, eastern part and western part, these are moving into different trends. With the Southeast Asia region, at present, I do not see that it's moving very optimistically. So, but we cannot be sure in future. But the thing is, at the moment, in going towards Thailand and Myanmar, it's at present it's not visible.
So the last question is, Nepal and Bangladesh have made a principal agreement of 500 megawatt trade in the near future. How India careful movement is likely to impact? It will be the.
That's why I said.
Will there be a dedicated transmission line, or will it be transmitted using existing grid?
Dedicated transmission line is not a practical solution at the moment. So ultimately, it will have to go through the Indian transmission system. So that's why I spoke in my presentation also. Let's see the government, Ministry of Power, Government of India memo of December 2018. It provides that opportunity to use the Indian transmission system for third country trade. So how practical it seems to be for the power transition between Nepal and Bangladesh. It will be the first test case. It will be a litmus test about that possibility.
Thank you, sir, for your
Okay. Thank
time.
you. Thank you all.
We'll now move to the next presenter.
Thank you all.
Dear audience, today by Ms. Elena Ocenik, Associate Program Officer in International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. Ms. Elena has hands-on experience in solar photovoltaic project development and expertise in European electricity market regulation. She is currently exploring how innovations in enabling technologies, business models, market design, and system operation can help IRENA members achieve their ambitious renewable energy power policy by mid-century. She has 10 years of professional experience in academia, European institutions, international organizations, the private sector, and NGOs, including French, German, and Romanian associations. She graduated with a master's degree in international economic policy, focusing on energy from Sciences Po Paris, France, and a bachelor degree in political science and economics from the University of Heidelberg, Germany. Thank you, Ms. Elena, for joining us. Over to you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent.
You can start your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you also to the three speakers before me. I would like to start the presentation to complement perhaps with some learnings outside the SAARC region in this conversation about cross-border trade. And please let me start by saying one word about the International Renewable Energy Agency. For those who do not know us very well, we play a leading role in the global energy transformation, and our mandate is to promote the widespread adoption of sustainable use of all forms of renewable energy worldwide, from bioenergy, geothermal, hydropower, up to ocean, solar, and wind. And what I would like to do today is to quickly present IRENA's systemic innovation approach in the energy transition, and then discuss about regional markets, specifically the way we treat them in this context, and go deeper into the pan-European electricity market, and to see some learnings from there. Okay, the first point, the starting point when we look at regional markets is that in the past 10 years, we have seen dramatic cost reduction in the power generating technologies, especially when we speak about solar photovoltaic and onshore wind. The costs have been falling between 35% for onshore wind and even more important reduction in the cost of solar PV, which has witnessed 77% cost reduction. Now, from this starting point, we see that if we would like to meet the Paris Agreement, these two power generating technologies will have to increase in the generation mix from 6% in 2018 up to 35% in the case of onshore wind by mid-century, and this share will increase as well significantly for solar PV from 2% to 25%. And we can see that in the global energy transition, these two power generating technologies, together with hydropower, will make up almost 90% of the power generating mix, and accordingly we will see an increase in the total installed capacity. Now, this is to say that the big challenge going forward will be to integrate these resources into the power systems, and in order to do this, we have mapped over the past 3 years now what you can see here, the so-called innovation landscape report, which maps 30 key innovations to integrate these resources into our current systems, and how it also describes how the changing roles of actors will happen. In addition to this work, we have published, and we are about to finalize the publication of 30 additional innovation landscape briefs for each of these innovations. And what I would like to also do quickly is that based on this framework, we have developed a so-called systemic approach to innovation, where we looked at 4 different dimensions. On the one hand, enabling technologies, business models, market design, and system operation innovations. And based on this work, we have also published a a Swedish case study where we look specifically at how these innovations apply in a given context, in this case, in Sweden, because they have a policy objective to meet 100% of their power needs from renewables by 2040. Now, I would like to quickly show you, based on the three key innovation trends that we observed worldwide, electrification, decentralization, and digitalization. And without wanting to go into detail into these trends, I would like to present quickly the innovations that we map in this framework. We have in the first dimension, when we speak about enabling technologies, storage, also digital technologies, when we speak about Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and blockchain, but also grids, among others. The second dimension refers to business models, and there you can find models such as aggregators, peer-to-peer electricity trading schemes, among others. And the third dimension refers to market design and more generally to regulations. So there we can speak about changes like increasing the time granularity or the space granularity in markets, but also about regional markets in themselves. And the fourth dimension refers to system operation, but without wanting to go into detail in the interest of time, the focus will be today on regional markets. Now, what's important before we dive deeper into this is in our systemic innovation approach, that one innovation will not be sufficient as we move forward to integrate these resources. So enabling technologies do offer new opportunities to operate the system. However, the question of how we monetize the value created with these new technologies, for example, EVs, electric vehicles, or other digital technologies, depends if the private sector can identify new business opportunities and make use of this, creating therefore a virtuous loop, or if this is not the case, new regulations and a new market design, new incentives will be needed to help create these new business cases. What is important in this systemic approach is that we need to combine innovations into solutions that are practical and can be implemented. And in our innovation landscape report, we have looked deeper into 11 solutions, and we have also included advice on their suitability in different contexts and the impact. And among the different solutions that we looked at, one was particularly the grid flexibility solution, and it referred to the interconnections and regional markets as a flexibility provider to integrate these variable resources, meaning solar and wind. Now, without further ado, I would like to move now, perhaps to show you quickly how this looks like. This solution is a combination of innovations from the enabling technologies dimension and the market design dimension, where we have Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and big data, as well as market design innovations like regional markets and increasing the time granularity in electricity markets. Now let's have a closer look at regional markets, and here you have also a picture of the cover of the brief that goes into detail, and the report, the overarching report, where all what I presented until now is elaborated in further detail. Here what is important is that there are different levels of regional market integration. And depending on the integration level, we can identify three different categories. On the one hand, we have early stage of a market integration, and there the level of interconnectivity, the trading arrangements, and the harmonization rules are quite simple in the sense that there is a physical interconnection between two countries, and the trading arrangements are rather long-term, bilateral, and over-the-counter, meaning outside an organized power exchange. So we speak more about power purchase agreements. And the harmonization rules between the two countries would be rather simple, agreed for the operation of the interconnected system. The next level would be a shallow market integration, where the physical interconnection goes beyond 2 countries and can cover several countries. And we do have long-term PPAs, but there can be also an additional short-term wholesale market operated in place. Now, of course, the harmonization of the rules is deeper as well, so we can also have grid codes as well as harmonized transmission tariffs. And the third level of integration, of market integration, would be a deeper one, where we speak about full synchronous operation of a multi-country interconnected system. In terms of trading arrangements, we have well-functioning markets with competition achieved through trading in different time frames and various markets. We can have over-the-counter trading, but also an organized power exchange. We can have capacity markets in addition to pure energy-only power markets. We can speak about different time frames, trading time frames, day-ahead, intraday, but also longer term. So of course, here the harmonization rules are more complex and deeper. There can be regulatory regional agencies with regional market operators and a harmonization of market rules with grid codes and also with harmonized transmission tariffs. A couple of international examples. We have looked in our reports at the Central American power market that covers 6 countries, also the European Union. This was mentioned before, and thank you very much for this. During a previous presentation today, there we have 23 countries in the day-ahead market, although this number you will see in a second has increased since we published this report. And we also have an intraday market that covers a large number of countries, which again has increased from the moment we have published this report. We also looked at other regional market arrangements in Eastern Africa, the Greater Mekong sub-region, also South Africa power pool, and also the American Western energy imbalance market in the United States. There are different ways to look at. We don't have to go into detail into the different arrangements, but perhaps what is interesting is to see how this works together. And if we look at the 2 different dimensions that I mentioned before, in terms of trading arrangements, from bilateral contracts to having a more harmonized, common wholesale markets, to the harmonization of ancillary services, and even to having a capacity market in place in addition to the energy-only market. And on the other hand, the level of integration, we can see that most of the market that we know until now around the globe would fall in the first dimension of an early stage of market integration, with some example of a shallow market integration, and with the US Western energy imbalance markets and the internal electricity market in the European Union being the most advanced and deeply integrated ones. There were some benefits already mentioned during today's webinar in what exactly regional markets could bring. And I would like to take a different angle by looking at the wind and solar power integration specifically. So the benefits would be an increased flexibility in the system by expanding the balancing area of a given country, of a given power system, but also taking advantages of the spatial complementarity of the generation of reliable renewable energy sources by complementing this, for example, with hydro or other generating technologies. But also the coordination of the generation planning would be beneficial, and eventually this leads to reduced system operation costs, which ultimately bring benefits to the end consumer. And this is illustrated, and we have more and more data from international experience, from the projects that I mentioned, from the markets I mentioned around the world. So we can see, for example, just to mention perhaps one example, in Denmark, a country that has been very often used as an example to show a very high share of renewables in the system. The number was 49 when we published this report. In the meantime, Denmark has over 53% of wind. without significant curtailment, and this is thanks to their interconnection to their neighboring countries like Germany, Norway, and Sweden, which have, among others, a very important hydropower base. But there are other examples, and we have other data from in other countries. For example, we see 50% of curtailment being reduced. This is in the case of United Kingdom and Ireland, with the help of their subsea interconnection. But we can also look at other savings, for example, in the United States, thanks to the cooperation and their regional market. According to some estimates, there are up to 208 million US dollars of annual savings from the trading of balancing services. Now, if you look also at the cost, of course, there are benefits, but there are also complexity to implement such arrangements. And I mentioned that the benefits in terms of flexibility are very high. And this can range, depending on the arrangement that are in place, this can range between seconds to days, but however, also over longer time frames. And this, we also heard today some examples of the arrangements, the bilateral arrangements in place to make use of the seasonality between winter and summer. In terms of the cost and complexity, the technology and infrastructure costs can be very high if the interconnections are not already in place. In terms of the required changes in the regulatory framework, we estimate this to be moderate to high, depending, of course, to what level we integrate these markets, if they're fully or rather partially integrated. At the same time, implementing such a solution would require important changes in the role of the existing actors. This means coordination between the transmission system operators, between the market players, in the different markets, in the different countries, the utilities, and so on. Again, here it depends, the exact cost would depend on the level of integration desired. And we estimate that this would be somewhere between moderate and high compared to the benefits brought in terms of flexibility. And there are also other challenges in order to implement this, such as the political and regulatory challenges. And perhaps if we look at it from a different point of view, the key enabling factors that we see from all this international experience in order to implement regional arrangements, the first one would be having the physical interconnection with sufficient capacity in place made available for trade. The second one refers to the regional mindsets with strong institutional arrangements and the governance model in place. And the third one would be robust IT systems for the market operation in itself. Now let's have a closer look at the European electricity market. It's important before we start to understand the policy context and the historical evolution of regulation, where we started from the monopole national markets to competition, and we even speak about an energy union. Over time, with the first the so-called energy package, meaning a set of regulatory instruments, we had the first common rules for the internal market and the first liberalization of electricity and gas. This has started in 1996 and 1998, and eventually we had a second set of rules that have sped up the liberalization process, but also the market integration of these two commodities. And the third energy package that is still being implemented today and is about to be finalized refers to a EU-wide institutional and regulatory framework where unbundling is a key cornerstone of this regulation. And by unbundling, we refer the separation between the activities of power generation, power transmission and distribution, and supply, but also the creation of institutions such as national regulatory authorities in each country, and the creation of a supranational body the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, so ACER, that has cross-border, has actually decision-making power over cross-border issues, while the decision-making power remains with the national regulatory authorities on matters that are of national interest. And what is new perhaps, and some of you may have followed the developments, is that last year there was a fourth energy package, the so-called Clean Energy for All Europeans legislative package that entered into force, and it covers several aspects from energy performance in buildings to energy efficiency, renewable energy, but also specifically on markets, risk preparedness, also the governance of the energy union, but also new regulation in terms of ACER. Now, if we have time, we can go into detail during the questions and answers session on what exactly is new in this package compared to the third one, but I would leave it here for now. I think what is interesting from the new electricity, from the new regulation on electricity from this package is that this regulation aims to set the fundamental principles of a well-functioning integrated market, which allows resource providers and consumers a non-discriminatory market access. It empowers the consumers and ensures competitiveness on the global market, as well as demand response, storage, and energy efficiency. It allows for aggregation as well of the distributed demand and supply, and it enables sectoral integration. All of these following a market-based approach. Now, looking at the pillars of the internal energy market, and specifically the electricity target model, there are several building stones of this target model. And one important element is the bidding zone configuration. Bidding zone means market area, because in the European Union, the desired or the followed market design was a zonal as opposed to a nodal one. So the capacity calculation and the long-term allocation of the capacity are integral parts of this model. And we have, in addition to the long-term trading aspects, shorter-term spot trading arrangements, such as day-ahead, intraday, and balancing markets. What is important here when we speak about the bidding zone configuration, the market areas, is the following. I would like to highlight with this map that in most of the countries, indeed, the countries, the national borders equal a market area in this integrated market. However, in certain cases, you can see this in orange, the national borders are smaller, or let's say the market area goes beyond the national borders. So we can see here, for example, the Northern Ireland and Ireland constitute one single market area, and this is also the case for Germany, Austria. It used to be the case for Germany, Austria, and Luxembourg. And in other cases, because there was congestion in the transmission system, the market areas has been split, and we see that there are several market areas within one country. This is the case for Sweden, for Norway, and also for Italy. So perhaps also what is important from the new regulation is that efficient decarbonization of the electricity system via market integration would require systematically abolishing the barriers to cross-border trade to overcome the market fragmentation in European context. Now let's have a look at the status of today's pan-European electricity market. And what you can see on this map is that in the day-ahead time frame, today in Europe, there are 26 countries that trade with each other in this time frame, meaning that today there are 26 countries that are trading for the physical delivery tomorrow. And if you look at the intraday markets, there are 21 countries, with a few exceptions. We see that this is an important progress that European Union has made since the start in the mid-late 90s to where we are today. And the latest countries, this is really latest developments. In November 2019, we had 7 additional countries joining the so-called single intraday coupling through the XB, the cross-border intraday project, which is the commercial name of this platform. What I would like to also show you with the next map is that we have achieved this important interconnection covering such an important number of countries, but it was gradual again, not only in terms of regulation and the implementation of the regulation, but also gradual in terms of the countries that have started this project. So it started in the Nordics, in the Nordic countries, and eventually extended around 2006 with some Western European countries, including later Germany and Austria, and eventually spreading throughout Central and South Europe, and achieving the level of integration of market coupling that we see today. What I want to show you also is that in terms of the cooperation, indeed, there is a complexity of what it means also to interconnect and to harmonize all these activities. And just for the sake of illustration, I wanted to show you here the horizontal level where we have cooperation between the transmission system operators between the different countries. And this is done via, this was also mentioned before, via the European Network for Transmission System Operators for Electricity in Europe. The body, the acronym of this body is ENTSO-E, but there's also cooperation that happens in between one country at the vertical level, meaning between the transmission system operator and the distribution system operator, because we have this unbundling rules in the European Union. I think now what is really interesting, perhaps in terms of the benefits, concretely, if we look at the indicators of the market outcome in this regional market, we can see that in 2017, out of the total 74 terawatt hours traded in this market, most of the trades, 78%, were intra-zonal trades. This means the trades happened on the markets inside one area, inside one zone, market area, as I presented it before. However, we can also see there's a high share, a relatively high share, 17% of cross-zonal trades between neighboring adjacent bidding zones, meaning between two neighboring market areas. But what's even more interesting is the 5% of trades between non-adjacent market areas, meaning these are market areas that are not next to each other, like physically next to each other. And if we look at how this has evolved over time between 2017 and 2018, not only has the amount of intraday trades increased, but we also see something new, and that is the trades between non-neighboring market areas that operate or that trade with each other outside the same market operator, because we also have the notion of competing market operators in Europe. And this is increasing, and this is really the novelty in the European context. Now let's have quickly a look at the evolution over time of these trades in the past 2 years, where we have the data. And here we can see clearly that the share of these trades of non-neighboring countries indeed is made possible through this arrangement by having this integrated market, and this can be traded, these volumes of, in the end, of electricity can be traded up to 5 times, almost up to 5 minutes before physical delivery in the intraday market today in Europe, in certain areas, depending on the rules set by the transmission system operator locally. So there are clear benefits in terms of benefiting. There are clear results in terms of benefiting from these arrangements. Now, before reaching a conclusion, I would like to also show you that having interconnections is one element, but having the market arrangements in place, but using efficiently the existing infrastructure is of equal importance. And we see, based on the market monitoring conducted regularly by the Agency for the Cooperation of Energy Regulators, that the efficiency of the use of the infrastructure in the day-ahead market is more efficient than the other timeframes, also because the market has been in place for a longer period of time, and this has functioned better over time, so almost 90%. What we mean here is that electricity flows in the right economic direction, in the sense that when there's a price difference between two market areas, the electricity flows indeed from the low price areas to the high price areas, and eventually also leading to price convergence. Now, before concluding, I would like to show you also that indeed, if you look at the social welfare benefits that have been obtained and could be potentially still be obtained in the European market integration, we see that in the day-ahead coupling, from the total amount of estimated social welfare gains, the vast majority have been already be seen and reaped. And they're, of course, given the number that I showed you, which is quite low in terms of efficiency in the intraday markets at about 50%, there are more benefits to be reaped in the intraday market, but even more importantly in the balancing market. And this is indeed where the cornerstones and the most of the work is being conducted today in the European Union. However, given the market design chosen, indeed, what's very important is the bidding zone configuration. So the configuration of the market areas, which can lead to even more important benefits if these are really based, the market areas are defined based on the systemic and long-term congestion of the transmission network rather than on, let's say, political borders. And I would like to finish my presentation by announcing that we will also have some webinars. We have launched a new series, and the next one will take place on Tuesday, the 17th of March, between 10 and 10:30 Central European Time. And we will go into detail into the innovations for 100% renewable power together with a colleague. So please join us if this is a topic of interest for you. And for those of you who would like to learn more about the innovations and the technologies that are being implemented around the world right now, we will organize the IRENA Innovation Week between the 8th and the 10th of September in Bonn here in Germany. And with this, I would like to close by providing for your later reference some further reading and the links to all the material that I have used in order to give this presentation. And with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Irina, for your informative presentation. We're now going to entertain some questions. First question is from Pakistan. Do you think that the distributed generation and mini microgrids can completely replace the central electricity generation systems? And the second part of this question is, which technology has more prospects for success in global future mobility in electric vehicles or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles?
Thank you very much for these two very interesting questions. So the first one on the distributed energy, I think it depends on the context, but in general, when we look at the distributed grids and the centralized grid, we don't necessarily see a competition between them, but rather a complementarity. Today, what is important to say is also that indeed we see decentralization as being a major trend when we speak about innovation. However, the number is still very low today. So today we have about 1% of distributed generation connected to the grid. So it will take a while before we can actually see or even speak about a real competition in this sense. So the systems will remain largely centralized. However, the mini grids, and this is in a context of energy access, they will have more and more a growing importance. And here I think it's really important to see which region or which context we speak about, because we also see more and more studies coming up and being published where this is being compared. So it's also a matter of cost. In certain situations, the distributed grid, mini grids, even off grids are easier and more cost efficient to be implemented than expanding the grid, the transmission grid. So this is why there is not a simple answer to this question. And the second question, if I understood it correctly, referred to electric vehicles and which technology would be more efficient or more meaningful in the energy transition. And here again, when we speak about hydrogen or electric vehicles, we see different applications. Electric vehicles, we see them emerging and the number is continuously increasing, the number of vehicles sold, continuously increasing with countries like China and Norway leading in this context. But this is rather for small passenger uses. When we speak about hydrogen application, we see a business, not yet a business case, but we see evolving or emerging business cases rather for trucks and for long-haul vehicles. So I think both technologies will be needed. Maybe they will be competing at a certain point, but this competition has not been identified or hasn't been clear-cut yet.
The next question is also a bit similar in context, but with the integration of renewables to the system growing day by day, it must be a challenging task to operate the regional grid. In your view, is it possible to keep on increasing the share of renewables and slowing down of thermal generations? And are the regional grids ready to handle these changes?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question?
Yeah, the last part is are the regional grids ready to handle these changes?
Yeah, so the question comes back to the flexibility. Are the power systems today ready to deal with this large number and increasingly large number of distributed energy resources? And this is why we see that there is a need in increasing the flexibility. And flexibility, I haven't brought this figure here, but we see it important to unlock this flexibility of the current power systems across the entire value chain of the power sector. And this we can do in several ways. We can do this by incentivizing the current generators to operate more flexibly, so they can operate in complementarity and actually help integrate solar and wind. So we can have pumped hydro, we can operate the conventional hydropower plants in more flexible ways, but we can also refurbish the thermal power plants in order to provide more flexible services and ancillary services to the system operator to accommodate for these variable sources. So this is on the generation side. On the grid side, we see, and one of the key flexibility providers is what we are talking about today, is increasing the trade among countries to make use of the complementarities of the resources available in the different countries to maximize the benefits for everyone involved. But there's another element to this, and that is demand side. So the demand, because for now, historically, we have always seen power following, the generation following demand. So the flexibility was really only on the generation side. But with unlocking the grid flexibility side, with more regional, more regional trades, and by that I mean more regional trades and more cross-border trades, we can also, in addition to this, unlock the demand side. So, and this is why I was saying at least if we look from the European experience with the new changes, the new regulatory changes in place, the consumer is put at the center of these arrangements, meaning that consumers will no longer be just passive, but they can participate and control their demand. They have the right now, as this is the rule today, they have the right to have a dynamic time of use tariff. They are entitled to smart meters. And this is the case in all the European Union countries, unless, of course, there's a negative cost-benefit analysis, but this is a specific case and it's rather the exception than the rule. And they can also participate by aggregating. So this is also a new actor that has been acknowledged. Its role has been acknowledged in the new regulations. And this aggregator can bundle all these different smaller loads in order to provide a service to the transmission system operator, but also trade the generation, the distributed generation on the market. For example, we can imagine the aggregator bundling all the solar PV that is being produced on the rooftops of individual homes and acting as the market player at the same time as any other conventional market player. And I hope that this answers this question, but if not, please let me know and I can follow up on this.
Okay, so one last question is with regards to the guaranteed offtake, do you prefer take or pay commercial terms instead of take and pay for renewable energy projects?
I'm sorry that the connection cut again. May I kindly ask you to repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. With regards to guaranteed offtake, do you prefer take or pay commercial terms instead of take and pay for renewable energy projects?
I don't think this is a matter of preference. So from our point of view, we don't have any preference of the various contractual clauses. So we can also only, the way we look at them is only in the sense of comparing the different instruments that are available, contrasting them, collecting the information from international experience. And then depending on the context, we can look and make some policy recommendations. But we don't really have a preference. So this is, let's say, this is not necessarily our role. But we know that in PPAs there is the take or pay clause, but again we don't really look at this. But if you want to learn more about the different let's say the different contractual arrangements that can be in place and have a comparison or look into deeper in this, we also have done a lot of work on this. And on the contrary, we even have now standardized contracts published that developers can access online for free and even use them in their transactions. So for example, there are PPAs in English where the information is blank and can be filled in depending on the context and being changed. So this is part of the work that IRENA does to facilitate the trade, but also the finalization of contractual arrangements in the various countries. So if this is of interest, I can also, of course, also add perhaps in the presentation the link to this new work that we have published this year.
This we now come to the end of our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Dear audience, our presenters today try to recommend you and sensitize the policymakers regarding the importance of the energy trade between SAARC countries. They recommended the cross-border electricity trade based on the following benefits. The cross-border electricity trade can result in optimal use of the resources. It can result in security of supply. It can allow higher penetration of renewable energy by utilizing the different resources available in member countries. It can also help in reducing the environmental cost by increasing the availability of clean energy projects. SAARC Energy Center will continue to play its role in facilitating the energy cooperation between SAARC member states for electricity trade. With this, we now have come to the end of our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. I would like to reiterate that all materials relevant to this webinar will be available on SAC website. Please do provide us feedback regarding the webinar through the feedback survey. Thank you and goodbye.